Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Serbian political parties. So today's episode was requested by KW, VV, and Sam Volkers on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, please either comment it down below, send me an email, or put a request in the feedback and request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Greek parties, Ukrainian parties, German parties, Moldovan parties, South Korean parties, Moroccan parties, Chilean parties, Swiss parties, Iranian parties, Mexican parties, and many more. Serbia is often described as either a hybrid regime, a competitive authoritarian state, and a liberal democracy, and/or a state with a dominant party system. While these terms don't all exactly describe the same system, they all pretty much mean a state that is partially free and democratic, with elections and opposition parties allowed to contest, but also with a playing field that very much favors the status quo and government parties, and with several important legal or even physical restrictions on the opposition that prevent it from winning. Serbia certainly falls into this definition, with Serbia over the past several years becoming more and more authoritarian, with the government of President Aleksandar Vučić and the SNS effectively dominating the country and its institutions. While the latest parliamentary election in 2022 saw the SNS get its worst result ever since 2012, it still, with its allies, holds a majority in the main legislative body. The main legislative body is the National Assembly, which is made up of 250 MPs. MPs are elected via proportional representation, with a party or coalition needing at least 3% of the vote in order to win seats in the assembly. Parties or electoral lists for ethnic minorities can ignore this threshold, so long as they get a decent amount of support, although that support isn't really quantified, it seems. The assembly will vote on rules and regulations, elects the prime minister, the second most important political figure in the country, along with several other political figures, and can change the constitution. Officially, the National Assembly is supposed to be more powerful than the president, but de facto the president is dominant. And then also throughout the episode, I'll mention 3 other legislative bodies. There is the Assembly of Vojvodina, which is the legislative body for Vojvodina, an autonomous region in the north that is ethnically more diverse than the rest of Serbia. Then there is the City Assembly of Belgrade, which is the legislative body for the city of Belgrade, the capital and largest city in Serbia. And then finally, there is the Bosniak National Council, which is an organization that is democratically elected that represents Bosniaks in the region of Sandžak. These organizations are all quite weak when compared to the National Assembly, and one of them is technically not even a part of the nominal Serbian government, but these assemblies do represent another minor but important political body in Serbian politics. So the ruling party since 2012 is the Srpska napredna stranka, or Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS. The SNS was created in 2008 as a breakoff of the Serbian Radical Party, an ultranationalist party. While most reasonable people would say it certainly isn't ultranationalist, it's not entirely clear where it falls on the political spectrum. I've heard the SNS, or wings of the party, described as conservative, liberal, populist, right-wing populist, nationalist, or even non-ideological. I think it's probably best to describe it as just holding a party of power ideology, not dogmatically sticking to any programs, and doing whatever it thinks is best or just keeps them in power. It has ruled the country since 2012, getting the most votes every election, due at first to their promise of anti-corruption reform, and then later due to them running on their experience and track record on improving Serbia's relations to other countries in Europe and the EU, and maintaining a mostly stable government. It seems to get the most support in the middle of the country, particularly in rural and suburban areas, although it tends to dominate pretty much everywhere. It currently has 93 MPs, and is the ruling party in both Belgrade and Vojvodina. It is currently led by Vučić. Also the current Prime Minister of Serbia, Ana Brnabić, is also a member, and fun fact, she is the first openly gay Prime Minister in Eastern Europe. The SNS has historically fought for increased economic privatization, free market reforms, reducing the public sector, weakening labor laws, and increasing foreign investment in the country. A large part of this push is due to the party's pro-EU stance. In order to understand the foreign policy of the SNS, I'd like to read the title of a couple of YouTube videos out to you. In 2016, Euronews post, Pro-EU Progressive Party claims Serbia's general election. Then in March of 2021, the Foreign Policy Research Institute releases Serbia's authoritarian trajectory under Russian influence. And then just in January of this year, TLDR News EU released, "Why has Serbia U-turned on Russia?" So what is going on? Part of this is just the fact that the SNS's position isn't always consistent, with it sometimes leaning more towards the West and other times more towards Russia. Another part of this is that the SNS's official foreign policy calls for Serbia to not only join the EU, but also maintain close ties with Russia at the same time, which, as the EU and Russia become increasingly antagonistic, becomes harder and harder to do. The SNS also supports closer relations with China and America, is opposed to outright Kosovoan independence, seemingly wanting some compromise, and promotes more modernization. The SNS has in recent years come to be increasingly criticized as authoritarian. It has cracked down on the opposition, consolidated its control over the country's media, and sometimes threatened people with losing their jobs if they criticize the government. And one SNS politician attempted to kill a journalist who reported on corruption he partook in. Corruption also is a common criticism from the opposition, with SNS and government politicians able to use their political connections to amass wealth and buy property, with one CINS report stating that the party has over 200 million dinars worth in property throughout the country. Its stance on Europe and Russia also is often criticized, because it isn't 100% pro-EU or 100% pro-Russia. It leads to it being criticized by pro-EU liberals as a puppet and apologist for Russia, while nationalists and leftists see it as stooges for Brussels and or foreign capital. It also is criticized for being very neoliberal and supportive of right-wing economics, Vucic's history as an ultranationalist that denied war crimes in the 90s, and Brnabić being a lesbian in a government with several conservative politicians. The SNS, despite all these criticisms, is still in power. One of the ways the SNS is able to continue dominating the country is by allying with several smaller parties. The SNS and these parties all run together on a joint list every election, and in exchange for their support, the SNS gives them ministerial positions, influence over policy, or more cynically, some kickbacks. The SNS coalition is known by the name Alexander Vucic, Together We Can Do Everything, which is quite a mouthful. Obviously, the SNS is the dominant player in the coalition, with over 3/4 of the coalition's MPs coming from the SNS alone. The next largest players in the coalition are the Social Democratic Party of Serbia, a Socdem party that is seemingly based in the Sandžak region and among Bosniaks, considering it is the largest opposition party in the Bosniak National Council, and the Party of United Pensioners, Farmers, and Proletariats of Serbia, Solidarity and Justice, another mouthful of a name, that is mostly concerned with pensioner interest and is under the control of the Krkobabic political dynasty. Other parties in the coalition are the Strength of Serbia movement, a conservative party, the Serbian People's Party, a party seemingly most concerned about opposing Western interest, the Serbian Renewal movement, a party with a long history but today is center-right and monarchist, the Movement of Socialist, a party that is nationalistic but also is in favor of more economic regulations, the People Peasants Party, an agrarian party, the United Peasants Party, which is mostly based in Serving, and finally the Better Serbia Party, which is mostly based in Topola. But the largest ally of the SNS isn't even in this coalition. Instead, the SNS's biggest ally is the Socialistica Partija Serbiae, or Socialist Party of Serbia, or SPS. The SPS was formed at the fall of socialist Yugoslavia from ex-members of the Serbian Communist Party. It ruled the country under Slobodan Milosevic from 1991 until 2000, when Milosevic was overthrown. Milosevic and the SPS government was, and still is today, infamous for its role in the Yugoslav wars. After it was removed from power, it became an opposition party outside the government until 2012 when it joined with the SNS. It since then has served as a reliable ally to the party, helping the SNS form a majority. The SPS today is ideologically left, embracing democratic socialism or social democracy, but also having a strong nationalistic and populist streak it inherited from Milosevic. It historically got the most support from those in trade unions who were enticed by the party's left-wing economic policy, Serbs who oppose Western influence in the country due to its more nationalistic streak, and with more support in the south and the east. Its last election got its best results in Vojvodina and Surlitska. It currently has 22 MPs and is part of the government in both Vojvodina and Belgrade. It is currently led by Ivica Daci, a former Prime Minister and current Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. The SPS is left-wing economically, conservative socially, and is slightly skeptical towards further EU integration. It calls on its website for a state that guarantees the right to work, healthcare, education, and social protection. It also calls for European integration and has in recent years become more friendly with the EU, but apparently many party members are hostile towards the Union, along with NATO and America for its role in the 1999 bombing of Serbia and their opposition to Milosevic. It also is seen as pro-Russian, is hostile towards separatism or even federalism in both Kosovo and Vojvodina, and wants strong social programs. The SPS's history as the party leading Serbia in the Yugoslav wars is one of the biggest controversies associated with the party. Milosevic and his drumming up of Serbian nationalism was one of the biggest factors leading to the Yugoslav wars, and thus many in Bosnia and Croatia, along with the West more broadly, place a lot of blame for the conflict at his feet. While you could probably make the argument that the origins and causes for the Yugoslav war are far more complex for just one man, the SPS still is looked at by some as having at least part of the blame for the conflict. Milosevic also during his rule was notable for cracking down on the opposition, killing those who criticized him and his policies. However, now that the SPS is a junior partner to the SNS government, and has been for over 10 years now, I'd imagine it has started to be seen more and more as just a party that serves the interest of the SNS, and less of its own political organization with its own unique policies or character. So, for example, its position on the EU is seen as it trying to appeal more to the political class in Belgrade that supports EU membership, which may lead its voters to see them as spineless. Much like the SNS, the SPS has its own coalition that it leads, called Ivica Daci, Prime Minister of Serbia. The name clearly calls for the SPS to take the Prime Minister position, but since 2014, the SNS has had their own in the prime ministerial position. The two parties besides the SPS in the coalition are the United Serbia Party, a conservative party, and then the Greens of Serbia, which is, unsurprisingly, an environmentalist party. The coalition is much smaller than the SNS-led one, and doesn't have as many unique parties, but they do make up an important part of the government coalition. There are other pro-government parties in Serbia, but for now we'll move on to the opposition, starting with Ujedinjeni, or United. United isn't technically a party or a coalition, but just a parliamentary group. It is made up of several parties that were a part of the United for the Victory of Serbia coalition, which was a coalition of various broadly pro-EU and liberal-ish opposition parties. So the United Parliamentary Group is made up of 5 different parties. From smallest to largest, there is the Fatherland Movement, which is a conservative party, mostly operating among Kosovo and Serbs. There is the Sloga Trade Union, which is a left-wing trade union. Then there is the Movement for Reversal, a social democratic party mostly based around a university professor. Then there is the Movement for Free Citizens, a liberal party. And finally, there's the Party for Freedom and Justice, which is a social democratic party, and is by far the largest party in the parliamentary group. Overall, these parties are all hostile towards the SNS and the government, and generally tend to lean somewhat center-left-ish. Generally, Serbia's pro-EU liberal opposition tends to get the most support in and around Belgrade. It currently has 15 MPs, and is a part of the opposition in Belgrade. It is currently led by Marinika Tepic, AMP, and a former Vojvodina Secretary for Sports and Youth. The United Group and the liberal opposition generally centers their campaign on removing corruption from the Serbian government. They want the government to stop giving kickbacks to their political allies, stop the censorship of the media, and want the government to operate in a less authoritarian manner. They also tend to criticize the government on things like inflation, the public debt, economic inequality, and environmental issues. The Party for Freedom and Justice also is in favor of joining the EU, wants to increase the salary of doctors, nurses, cultural workers, and teachers, wants to make education more affordable, and wants more assistance to pensioners. The United Group, much like the liberal opposition as a whole, is disadvantaged by the fact that they are up against the Serbian state, which has in recent years become more and more authoritarian. While some people may be more likely to support the Serbian opposition because the government is seen to be cracking down on dissent, and they want to stand up for freedom and protect their civil liberties, many will also choose to avoid supporting the opposition for fear of social repercussions of such a decision. Tepic, for example, has received death threats by far-right groups, which she has blamed on the government slandering her. The liberal opposition's pro-EU stance also has led to criticism. While Serbia isn't 100% opposed to joining the EU, many in the country are, and especially once you leave the major cities, most of the rural countryside is vehemently opposed to the EU. and Western influence in the country, so groups like United are seen as just useful idiots for the West at best, or outright controlled by the West at worst. The United group also has experienced several defections in recent months, the Party for Freedom and Justice being accused of not opposing the government enough, and also the only reason the United group is the largest rump faction for the Victory of Serbia coalition is because all the smaller parties joined it, with the Party for Freedom and Justice being the only party with a decent support base in the group. From the liberal opposition, we go to the right-wing opposition, with Nacionalno-Demokratska Alternativa, or the National Democratic Alternative, or NADA. NADA, which also translates into hope, is a coalition of right-wing parties that was formed in 2021. While there are around 30 parties, organizations, and associations within NADA, the three main political parties with MPs are the New Democratic Party of Serbia, a conservative party that ran the country briefly from 2000 to 2001 and from 2003 to 2008, and also historically did well in Western and Southern Serbia, the Movement for the Restoration of the Kingdom of Serbia, which is a monarchist party, and finally there is the small There Is No Going Back, Serbia is Behind, which is a nationalist party. The coalition overall is likely supported by those Serbs who feel the government is corrupt, but also don't want to ally with the Western-backed opposition and want to return to a more conservative and maybe even monarchical state. The coalition has 15 MPs, is the largest opposition in Vojvodina, and is present in the Belgrade City Assembly. It is currently headed by Milos Jovanovic, a former MP, and Jojislav Milenovic, a current MP and briefly in 2004 president of the country. NADA overall supports socially conservative policies, while also opposing Western influence in the country. It opposes the legalization of same-sex marriage, wants Serbia to become a monarchy, opposes increased immigration, wants to do more to support Serbs living in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Montenegro, and opposes the independence of Kosovo. It, while not outright opposed to Serbia joining the EU, seems to generally argue that so long as Kosovo remains outside Serbia and NATO and the EU defend Kosovo's independence, they can't really join the EU. It also opposes corruption in the country, supports more decentralization of the state, is pro-Russian, and opposes giving subsidies to foreign businesses, wanting only domestic-based businesses to benefit from the government's subsidies. A big problem NADA faces is just the fact that it isn't the only right-wing group in town. In the 2022 election, there were several other anti-government right-wing parties that all ran in the election, which competed for votes with NADA. Also within the government coalition, there are several conservative parties and politicians, which will likely appeal to right-wing Serbians and thus take votes away from the party. I also don't know if this accusation 100% applies for NADA, but apparently many right-wing parties and outfits in the country are viewed by the liberal opposition as being controlled by the government, so it's possible that those that are hostile towards the government may just view the party as a honeypot. Also, the Movement for the Restoration of the Kingdom of Serbia came into the 2022 election divided, with several of its party members aligning with the Dveri party, which we will talk about later. And the New Democratic Party of Serbia, since the 2008 election, has been on the decline, since it was under their government that Kosovo formally declared independence, so their inability to stop this likely has resulted in the party being seen as incompetent by some Serbs. Again, switching gears, we go to Moramo, or We Must. Moramo is a coalition, promises the last one, of mainly two left-wing parties, the Together Party, which seems to be a quasi-eco-socialist party, and then there is the Do Not Let Belgrade Drown Party, which is a party based solely in Belgrade and is environmentalist. The coalition overall represents the most left-wing group in the National Assembly and came to prominence last election as a result of major protests over the government allowing a foreign company to mine minerals that environmental activists argued would damage the environment. While other political parties and organizations were present, since the coalition members of Moramo have based most of their identity on protecting the environment, many young activists have flocked to their banner. They, like the Victory for Serbia coalition, got the most support in Belgrade. It currently has 13 MPs and is the largest opposition party in Belgrade. Moramo, as stated previously, mostly focuses on fighting against climate change and protecting the environment. They oppose Rio Tinto mining in the Jadar Valley, wants to do more to preserve Serbia's biodiversity, supports clean energy, and wants to reduce greenhouse gases. On foreign policy, it is pro-EU, favoring further cooperation with the Union and the West. It also supports further LGBTQ rights, wants to strengthen labor laws, and opposes authoritarianism in Serbia. Moramo's biggest problem seems to be just the fact that it is much smaller compared to other opposition parties. The Victory for Serbia coalition got over 14% of the vote. Admittedly, not a whole lot, but Moramo got less than 5%. While the opposition parties aren't as focused on environmental activism as Moramo, many of them do somewhat touch up on environmental issues, so many who are opposed to the government's handling of the environment may choose to make the pragmatic decision and back the more mainstream opposition parties rather than Moramo. Moramo, since it is founded and led by many activist-y types, probably suffers from a lot of the same things activist-y type organizations suffer under, being accused and made up of spoiled college kids, being unrealistic, and suffering from infighting and accusations of failing to live up to their own standards once they get any level of political power. Next we go to the Narodna Stranka, or People's Party. Narodna is a center-right conservative party that was a part of the Victory for Serbia coalition but broke apart after the election. It has emerged as a large single-party post-election and seems to represent conservatives and economic liberals who are opposed to the government but also don't want to vote for the more nationalistic parties, although we'll get to that later. Since it was a member of the Victory for Serbia coalition, it likely did best around Belgrade. It currently has 12 MPs and is present in the Belgrade Assembly. It is led by Vuk Jeremić, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs and the UN General Assembly President. Narodna defines itself as a party that wants to show, quote, loyalty and duty to our fatherland, our ancestors, the present and future generations of our people, unquote. It does this by wanting to decentralize the country, restoring rule of law, depoliticizing the security forces, and wants to remove corruption. While the Victory for Serbia coalition was a mostly pro-EU group, Narodna isn't as gung-ho on the Union, taking a somewhat similar approach to the New Democratic Party of Serbia, not outright opposing EU membership, but opposing membership so long as Kosovo is independent. It also opposes sanctioning Russia, wants to increase the birth rate of Serbia, raise the electoral threshold to 10% of the vote, and opposes the Rio Tinto mining project. The Victory for Serbia coalition ultimately broke apart after the election, due to disagreements between Narodna and the Party for Freedom and Justice, with Narodna criticizing the Party for Freedom and Justice going to meet with the SNS after the election, and Freedom and Justice accusing Narodna of populism, or just being unrealistic and unnecessarily hostile for no reason. Since Narodna has left the coalition, it has begun moving towards the more right-wing opposition, with, for example, it protesting with Dveri on February 4th over negotiations for normalizing Kosovo. While Narodna's more hostile position towards the EU may fit well within the right-wing opposition, it, as stated previously, is already a pretty crowded field, so Narodna hitching itself to this wagon may make it difficult for the party to grow or even make it into parliament next election, especially because it is more moderate than other parties in this field, so right-wingers may view it as too limp-wristed. Also, I'll just say it's a little ironic Narodna is calling for a 10% electoral threshold, when right now it is polling at less than 3% of the vote. Another ex-Victory for Serbia member is Demokratska Stranka, or the Democratic Party, or DS. DS was founded in 1990 and has historically been one of the leading voices for a pro-EU and liberal Serbia. It ran the country after Milosevic was overthrown until 2003, and then again from 2007 to 2012. It dominated politics in the mid to late 2000s, turning the country towards a more pro-Western stance. But since 2012, it has been on the decline, serving as a smaller but still important part of the opposition. It historically received the most support from university-educated young people in Belgrade and also from women voters who are attracted to the party's promise to liberalize Serbia in a more European direction, but also with more support broadly in Vojvodina and the east of the country. It currently has 9 MPs and is a part of the opposition in Belgrade. It is currently led by Zoran Lutovac, AMP and former ambassador to Montenegro. DS backs generally liberal and center-left ideas. DS, like many in the opposition, opposes corruption, wants a return to rule of law, supports greater workers' rights, favors further LGBTQ rights, wants more investment into healthcare and education, and supports the mixed economy, although when in power, it did privatize parts of the economy. It is very much pro-EU, wanting Serbia to join the Union and even criticizing the SNS for not being pro-EU enough. While most opposition parties, especially in the liberal opposition, are less than 10 years old, DS has some 30-some years of history, and dominated Serbian politics briefly, so DS's mistakes during this period are likely used to criticize them by their opponents. Notably, towards the end of DS's rule, there were increasing protests against DS for corruption, Remember, SNS came to power due to their promise of cleaning up corruption, increased authoritarianism, and neoliberal reform, all things that the SNS today is criticized of. So DS's criticisms of the government can in some ways ring kind of hollow, and are seen as not earnest in their beliefs. This also combines with all the other challenges other opposition parties face, such as crackdowns, accusations of being useful idiots to the West, and a hostile press environment make it difficult for the party to operate and grow. DS also has apparently suffered from a lot of infighting post-2012, as different members of the party all vie for leadership. We now go to probably the furthest right party in the assembly, with Srpska stranka Zapadnički, or Serbian Party Oathkeepers, or SSZ. SSZ is an ultranationalist party, founded in 2012. The oath in their name is a reference to its party members promising to never recognize Kosovo. It, while overall is pretty small, has been gaining prominence in recent years, getting its best result ever last election. Its appeal is very much to Serbian nationalists who wish for an unapologetically nationalistic Serbia, who are attracted to the party's bombastic rhetoric and anti-Western positions. It currently has 8 MPs and is present in the Belgrade Assembly. It is currently led by Stefan Stamonkiski, although when you open up their website, you first see his wife and MP, Milica Stamonkovski. SSZ is nationalistic and anti-Western. It strongly opposes Kosovoan independence, wants a crackdown on illegal immigration, opposes corruption, wants more funds to go towards the military, and supports compulsory conscription. It is very much opposed to the EU and NATO, actually bragging on its website that it led the largest anti-NATO protest in Europe in 2016. It also calls for Serbia to base its geopolitics on opposing a greater Albania, wants a crackdown on foreign NGOs in the country, and supports closer relations with Russia, China, Israel, and other countries in either BRICS or that don't recognize Kosovo. Since the SSZ is the most nationalistic party in Serbia, not surprisingly, Serbs who aren't as nationalistic will probably be turned off by the party's hardline stance, and they are accused of being xenophobic. They are accused of targeting NGOs who speak out against war crimes Serbia has committed by calling them traitors, so they are seen as somewhat engaging in historical revisionism or trying to threaten any who criticize Serbia and its historical legacy. The right-wing opposition is again a crowded place, and while their very extremist rhetoric may help them stand out, they still will ultimately be competing with other larger parties and coalitions for nationalistic voters. There also are accusations that the party is funded or are useful idiots of Russia, with high-ranking party members meeting with members of the ruling United Russia Party. They also are accused of not being real opposition, and the Stamonkovskis holding ties to both the SNS and corrupt people according to a series of articles by Direktno. So the last party that passed the 3% threshold is Dveri, or Doors, though I'm not sure what that refers to. Dveri was founded in 1999 and supported right-wing and very devoutly religious values. It seems to have been more extremist in its early days, being labeled as fascist, theocratic, and far-right. It, however, recently has tried to moderate and embrace a more Christian democratic position, and actually briefly worked with the liberal opposition in the late 2010s, although this seems to have ended. It gets the most support among younger Serbs, and not surprisingly among more devout Orthodox, due to its very religious-focused message. It currently has 6 MPs and is present in the Belgrade Assembly. It is currently led by Bosk Obradovnic, AMP. While Dveri has tried to moderate, it still supports very conservative social positions. It is very hostile towards the LGBTQ community, is pro-life, is hostile towards further immigration into the country, opposes Kosovoan independence, and is pro-monarchist. However, in moderating, it has also come to embracing environmentalist ideas, such as opposing the Rio Tinto mining project, supports a strong welfare state with a more economically nationalist policy, and wants to reform the electoral system to give more decision-making to the people. It also is hostile towards the EU, wants to decentralize the Serbian state, and is hostile towards the development of AI. While Dveri has somewhat softened its stance and tried to moderate, many still see it as right-wing and fundamentalist. Dveri, for example, has been one of the leading anti-LGBTQ groups that often attend the Pride Parade in Belgrade every year to, depending on how charitable you want to be, defend the traditional family, or just yell at or assault people who attend the event. Overall, Dveri, like many nationalists in Serbia, are seen as xenophobic. It also, like many other right-wing parties, is competing with them for votes. And while its more religiously themed message may appeal to hardcore Orthodox, those in Serbia who aren't as religious probably won't be attracted to the party. So we have now covered all the factions that got past the 3% threshold, and we'll move on to the minority parties. The largest of these minority parties is the Alliance of Vojvodina Hungarians, or in Hungarian, Vajdasági Magyar Szövetkezet, or VMSZ. VMSZ is, as the name suggests, a party for Hungarians living in Vojvodina, although it actually does operate outside the region. It was founded in the 90s, and while it has never been the largest party in Vojvodina, Hungarians, after all, make up less than 15% of the population in the region, it has always been very important, serving in pretty much every government in the region since 1996. It initially was allied to the liberal opposition in Serbia, but since 2014 has come to be an ally of the SNS. It gets the most support in northeastern Vojvodina, where the Hungarian community is centered. It currently has 5 MPs and is a part of the Vojvodina government. It is led by István Pavstar, a member of the Vojvodina Assembly and former minister of Vojvodina's economy. VMSZ's main goal is to protect the Hungarian community, but it also is considered conservative, and wants more autonomy for Hungarians in the region, wants more rural development, wants to create more jobs in the region, and is hostile towards increased immigration into Serbia. It also is pro-EU, wanting closer relations with Hungary, and wants to make it easier for Hungarians living in Serbia to gain dual citizenship. The party today ultimately represents Hungarians who are mostly in favor of the status quo and just want their autonomy to be protected. So the remaining minority parties are all, quite frankly, quite small. Out of the 5 remaining minority parties, none of them last election got over 1% of the vote. So these parties don't really play a major role in Serbian politics, but they still serve as a voice for their community and do play a small role in influencing policy in the country. The Bosniak community of Serbia is divided between 2 groups, the Justice and Reconciliation Party, which is friendly with the government and is more popular in central Sandžak, and also the Party of Democratic Action Sandžak, which is seen as more hostile towards the Serbian government and is more popular in southern Sandžak. Those of you who listened to my History of Bosnia episode may recognize the name Party of Democratic Action, since it was, and is till today, the leading party of the Bosniaks in Bosnia. Regardless, both parties have a conservative ideology and work together in the Bosniak National Council. Back in Vojvodina, there is a Democratic Alliance of Croats in Vojvodina. This party represents Croats in the region, is pro-government, and mostly operates in the northwestern corner of Vojvodina, where Croats are the most populous. They also ran together with the Together for Vojvodina party, which represents the Rusin community of the region. It, however, is hostile towards the SNS and is considered more left-wing. Finally, there's the Party of Democratic Action, which is based around the Albanian community of Serbia, is hostile towards the government, and operates mostly in the Prešova Valley. So those are the parties of Serbia. In conclusion, the party is dominated by the SNS. It is allied to several small parties, most notably the SPS and the VMSZ. The opposition is mostly divided between various different groupings, all competing with each other for influence. The right is divided between Narodna, which is the most mainstream right-wing opposition, SSV, which is an ultra-nationalist alternative, and Dveri, which is a devoutly religious alternative. The more liberal opposition is divided between the 3 rump factions for the Victory of Serbia coalition, United, Narodna, and DS. And finally, there is the We Must coalition, which is a left-wing alternative to all other groups. Ultimately, right now, it seems unlikely the SNS will fall anytime soon. It has an effective control of the country's media, it has a broad coalition of parties and groups backing it, and is able to run on the promise of continued stability. While the last election did show that SNS support is waning, the opposition still isn't able to mobilize and defeat them due to the continued infighting among them and accusations that they work for foreign powers. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching. I appreciate you all listening to the end of the episode. Up next, I will talk about Greek political parties, so going just a little bit down south. And then I will talk about the history of Chad. And then after that, I'll work on a special project that I've been kind of tinkering around in the background with for a while now, where I'll talk about the 2019 EU election in Britain and kind of ask if a group of YouTubers killed a political party in that election. So yeah, that'll be a little special fun election thing. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take care. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.